There are many interesting moments in the history of video gaming, from the crash of 83, the dawn of the arcade in the 70s, but let's face it, there's only one console war. And today's guest was probably best described as one of the generals of the two armies in that conflict. And we're here to talk with him. Please welcome to the show, Tom Kalinske.
Well, thank you. I like being called a general. I was only a sergeant in the Army.
Well, there you go. There you go. So, I gotta start off where I always start off with my interviews, and I ask people a little bit about their educational background. So, just take me back. What's your background?
Okay, so I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. Actually, went to high school there. My family was from Wisconsin. My mother and father. My mom was born in Madison. My dad in Sheboygan. They went to University of Wisconsin. My mom had 10 brothers and sisters, so I had like 26 cousins when I
Oh,
was a
Jesus.
kid around Madison. And in the summertime, when it was 110 in Tucson, we'd go back to Wisconsin, and I'd play with my cousins on the Lake Mendota and Lake Monona and go fishing and boating and swimming and what have you. So I knew Wisconsin in the summertime, and I decided, boy, this is pretty cool. I'm going to go back to school there. So I went to University of Wisconsin. I'd never been there in the winter when it went to 30 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. And I had a sweater and a windbreaker, and I discovered you needed a warmer coat. But anyway, I enjoyed my time at Wisconsin. I started my master's degree program there in business. Vietnam War was raging, and in
Mm,
those years, and so I was going to get drafted. And I didn't want to get drafted, so I enlisted in the
mm.
Army.
Okay.
Got assigned to a armor unit back in my home state of Arizona in Tucson, Desert Warfare Unit, and so I did that. Did tank. I did everything you could do on a tank. You start as a loader, then you end up as a driver, then you end up as a gunner, then you end up as a tank commander. And so I did that. And while I was in Tucson, I completed my master's degree at the University of Arizona. And I then took a job back in New York City for J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency. And I ended up getting assigned to the Flintstones vitamins account, or actually it was to the Miles Laboratories account, and they had a vitamin called Chalks, which is a chocolate chewable children's vitamin. A competitor, Bristol Myers, brought out fruit flavored, animal shaped vitamin called Pals, and the Chalks business basically disappeared. And so I ended up we got to develop a new vitamin, children's vitamin. So we researched everything under the sun, and we came up with, Flintstones. And there was a TV show on Friday nights, and it had just been canceled off of television here in the States, and was now a Saturday morning show. So we go back out
Just out of
to Miles
curiosity,
Laboratory.
I don't
Pardon?
want to interrupt, but just out of curiosity, what year are we talking here?
Well, we're talking 1968, 69. And
Okay.
so I was back in New York. Um, and anyway, we went out to Elkhart, Indiana, where Miles was, and we said, "Okay, guys, here we did all this research. You got to do Flintstones vitamins." And the guys out there were all doctors, and they said, "What, are you crazy? Flintstones was just canceled from primetime TV, and now it's a Saturday morning show. It's dying." No, that's better. And they didn't believe us, but eventually we prevailed after having to go back and forth New York to Elkhart several different times. And so we ended up doing the commercials for them, the packaging for them. The commercials, by the way, was the first time that a rotoscope commercial had ever been done. Rotoscope, as you probably know, you shoot live action against a green screen, and then you add in the animation. So we would add in a boy climbing a mountain, and next to him you'd have Fred Flintstone singing "Yabba Dabba Doo, Yabba Dabba Doo." Flintstones vitamins are good to chew, and that those commercials, we did a series of them, were very powerful, and Flintstones became the number one children's chewable vitamin in the United States, and that was about by 1970. And so, uh, you know, uh, Mattel took note of that, and they were looking to hire some people who knew something about children's marketing. And they hired me to come back to California, to Hawthorne, California, just outside of LA. And I started as a preschool product manager on CNCs, Jack in the Boxes, wooden putt-putt vehicles, tough stuff toys, which were basically indestructible. And so that was my start in the toy business. And one day, Ruth Handler, the co-founder of Mattel, who Ruth and Elliot Handler were like my second parents, and they liked me, which was a fortunate thing. And Ruth came into my office and she said, Tom, Barbie sales declined last year. The retailers say it's over for Barbie. The Wall Street analysts say it's over for Barbie. Go on to something else. My own sales force says maybe we should develop another doll line. What do you think about that? And I said, Ruth, those are the stupidest things I've ever heard. Barbie will be around long after you and I are gone. She said, that's what I want to hear. I'm going to talk to your boss's boss, who was a guy named Ray Wagner, about getting you on the Barbie business. So I went on the Barbie business. But before Ruth left my cubicle, actually, I said, so Ruth, what makes Barbie so special to you? And she said, Tom, with Barbie, a girl can be anything she wants to be. So I used that phrase and those ideas on packaging and PR and advertising for the next 15 years. And I started a strategy of segmenting the market for every type of girl would want to play with Barbies. So I did a low-cost Barbie. I did a My First Barbie for very young girls. I did high-priced Barbies for collectors. I did every occupation you can think of: Dr. Barbie, teacher Barbie, veterinarian Barbie. I did the Olympic license for Olympic Barbie for skating and skiing and gymnastics and what have you. And I did the same kind of thing with accessories, low price accessories, a bicycle, high priced accessories, a house. And the house was originally called the townhouse, and then we did the dream house. And if you have a house, you have to fill it with furniture, and you have to fill it with other dolls. So the house had a gross margin, but the dolls and the accessories and friends of Barbie all had high margins. And so that, frankly, was a hardware software model. Hardware, the house; software, you fill it with dolls and other furniture, obviously. And that was very similar to what I did later, obviously, in the video game industry. Anyway, so the
But
Barbie sales soared.
if you don't mind me asking, I'm very curious about this segmentation, because it's my understanding that the Barbie line did not have that previously.
It
That
didn't.
wasn't a feature. Now, what was it like? Because you're dealing with the 1970s. This is all pre the explosion of Toys R Us, uh, and you're dealing with a lot of smaller toy retailers. How difficult was it to sell this concept of segmenting the market, and I'm guessing increasing the number of SKUs?
Yeah, it did increase the number of SKUs. And by the way, the other thing I did was the pink packaging. Before that, sometimes Barbie was in a red package, Ken was in a blue package, the accessories were in a yellow pack. I mean, they're all different colors. It was a mess at retail. And so I said, okay, from now on, everything's pink, pink. And we did that, including Ken, which was kind of shocking to many people. Anyway, it was a little difficult because when a toy line declines, the retailers kind of do want to walk away from it, and we had to convince them to stick with it. And to do so, we had to kind of validate that this was going to work, which we did basically. And sales took off. They had declined from 100 million to 42 million, and that's why why the retailers thought it was over. We did the segmentation strategy. Sales grew back to about 80 million, then to 135 million, then to 300 million, then to 450 million, then to 550 million. And at that point, I hired a gal named Jill Barad out of the cosmetics business, who was actually even better at this than I was, I think, in segmenting the line. And she would do many more dolls, action dolls, hair play dolls, and where I was just doing occupations and low price and high price and collectors and Oscar de la Renta costumes on dolls and what have you. And Jill grew the business to about $1 billion. And I had stayed, I was still there, obviously, and got promoted and promoted. And I worked on Hot Wheels and did a segmentation strategy there. And then we did research to introduce He-Man Masters of the Universe, and obviously with Skeletor and Castle Grayskull and Prince Adam and She-Ra, his sister, who became Princess of Power. And all of that worked. So I ended up becoming the CEO of Mattel.
Now, which year do you become the CEO?
Well, I was president of the toy division by 1985, and very shortly thereafter, I was made. And by now we're talking about Mattel had serious financial problems, and television had collapsed, as you pointed out, in '83. But most people aren't aware. Mattel also owned Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, Western Publishing, a tubular steel company, a company called Metaframe, Pet Supply Company, also Audio Magnetics, a audio tape manufacturing company, Optigon Oregon. Anyway, everything went to hell basically in the early 80s and by 83. And so the toy division was the only thing kind of left. And but the banks were mad at us for having all these failures, these companies that failed. And so I had to go to get financing, and the banks wouldn't finance us anymore. And in the toy business, you need financing 9 months of the year because you don't get paid until Christmas time. And so, you need financing for your tooling, your R&D, your everything, manufacturing, advertising, personnel. And so we had to go hand in glove to meet with Drexel Burnham on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, and met with Mike Milken and said, well, we're going to have to go Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And he said, Barbie should never go bankrupt. I'll finance you in 36 hours. And he did. And so we had all of, it was expensive financing. It was what they affectionately called junk bonds. He called subordinated debentures. And, we had to pay 15% interest, but it allowed the company to survive. And I got promoted to co-CEO, actually, with another guy, John Ammerman, who had been president of International. So we were the co-CEOs, and we had to pay the high interest bonds back, obviously, which we did. And so it was a really good experience. It was a stressful time, but a very good experience, and taught me a lot about business.
Now, this would have all happened while the He-Man thing was booming in a very
Yep.
big way.
Yep.
I mean, as a kid who grew up eating Flintstones vitamins every day and buying ungodly amounts of He-Man toys, uh, I'm just realizing how much of an effect you've really had on my life. It's kind of scary.
Well, and the thing about He-Man, one quick story there. When we introduced the product line, we did it with just normal product introduction and advertising, and the battle took place in Castle Grayskull between Skeletor and He-Man, and Skeletor had his allies, and He-Man had his allies, and we fought it out in Castle Grayskull. And sales were about $75 million. And one day, the chairman of Mattel came into my office and he said, well, it's nice you've got a $75 million brand. Remember, I was just president of the toy division then. And this was like 1985-ish. And he says, but you'll never be able to compete with Star Wars or G.I. Joe because you don't have a TV show or a movie and you can't get one. And I said, you want to bet? So I hired a guy who knew a lot about t- children's television. And we did a deal with Group Westinghouse. They put up $3.5 million. Mattel put up $3.5 million. We hired Filmation Animation Studios to do an animated television show. So we did 65 with our $7 million. We did 60 in those days. You could do 65 half-hour episodes for about that price. And we then did something very unusual. Instead of trying to sell it across the country, we gave it away free. So we gave it to all these stations, whether you're in Wichita or New York City or Tucson or Los Angeles, a station would have the television show. And in return, Mattel got and so did Group W. We got 3 spots in the show to use for advertising or to sell. Well, at Mattel, we ended up selling most of the spots we got because we couldn't use them for He-Man advertising because that was against the Children Review Advertising Review Board. But we could sell them to McDonald's, to Nike, to Kellogg's, you name it. And so we sold most of ours. Well, the price you got for selling a show depended on the ratings of the show. Well, the ratings were so high, we ended up making a profit off of the television show, which was something we frankly never expected. We thought at best we'd break even, but we made a profit. And the shows were wildly popular. They went on for years and years and years. And of course, here we are all these years later, and Mattel's doing another series of television shows behind He-Man, and they're doing a new movie behind He-Man. So anyway, long story short, it was wildly, wildly successful, as you pointed out.
Now I do have to ask, because there is of course, I've always been curious about this. Number one, you just answered one of my big questions, which was how much did you sell the show for? So obviously to the stations, but the other one was that you kept having new lines of toys with new characters showing up. But like you said, the show ran for a very long time. So kids would constantly be seeing the older episodes in reruns with older characters that weren't on the shelf at the time. Did this become something that did this become an issue that it was that kids might not connect with the newer characters because they couldn't see them in the shows that they were seeing every day?
Not really, and I'm trying. You're stretching my memory now. I think we had a deal with Filmation where they would add in new characters that came out of new toys, and so I think we were doing that. And also, there was a provision in the contract, as I recall, if Filmation created a character that they wanted in the show, but we didn't have in the toy line, but we just wanted to put it in the toy line, then they would also get a royalty on the sales for that character.
Yeah, that would explain then things like Orko
Yeah,
becoming a toy. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So now I do have to ask, so you're at Mattel, everything is going good. You've paid off the junk bonds. Why does your tenure at Mattel end?
Well, because there was this strange thing was going on because we were co-CEOs, John and I, and people inside Mattel would say, "Well, I'm on John's team, or I'm on Tom's team," and it was getting to be a little contentious, not between John and I, but between people who decided what team they were on. John and I were friends. We still are today. So anyway, I didn't like that. I didn't like this whole idea of co. And so, by the way, I had tried to buy Matchbox toys out of receivership in the UK, and I wasn't able to do it at Mattel because the receivers, which were banks and the government and the unions and retailers and everybody under the sun, insisted that we keep a manufacturing plant open in the UK. Well, one of the reasons Matchbox was in receivership was it cost them about 65 cents to make a car in Enfield, England, and it cost me 30 cents to make one in Hong Kong for Hot Wheels. And so that was just a bad situation. So I couldn't agree to keeping a plant open in the UK. But one of my good friends who manufactured for everybody in the toy industry, Universal Manufacturing, run by David Ye, manufactured for us, manufactured for Hasbro, manufactured for Kenner. Um, he ended up negotiating to buy Matchbox. And here I am at Mattel, and he's got the deal done. And he says, "Why don't you join me if you're tired of this co-CEO stuff?" And so I did. And but I said to him, I said, "Well, we got this plant in Enfield that's uncompetitive." And he said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of that." So anyway, I joined, and we did a lot of things. We had to change management in the UK. I won't go into all the detail. We changed management basically everywhere around Europe. And for Matchbox, most of the business was in Europe or Australia, not in the US. The US was a smaller market for Matchbox in those days. Anyway, um, so we went down in the ranks of management, and we found guy there. It was run. The company was being run by great old English gentlemen who belonged to the best clubs in London, and they'd leave at 11 in the morning and come back at 3 in the afternoon, smashed. And so it wasn't a great situation. So I had to fire lots of people in management, and down in the organization, I found three actually really bright guys. John Barber, a marketing guy, uh, Alan Benny, a finance guy, Nick Austin, another marketing guy and operations guy, and I promoted them to running the company. And they turned it around in the UK. They turned it around in Germany. We hired a guy named Ludwig Darmstadter there, who was a great guy. Turned it around in France, turned it around in Italy, turned it around almost everywhere in Europe. And the company became very successful. I brought John Barber to the United States. He ran Matchbox USA. Later, he got hired by Toys R Us to become president of Toys R Us. Later on, I hired him back when I was at Leapfrog to run Leapfrog. So long circle of friendship and successful business experience there. Anyway, so that's kind of how it all happened. And then and then David says to me, "Now you can close that damn plant in Enfield," which we did, and we moved all the manufacturing to Hong Kong and eventually China.
Gotcha. Now, so you're still in the toy business. You've got Matchbox up and running. Uh, what's the next challenge? I mean, did
Well,
you
it was
start
interesting because
diversifying their product line or what?
well, we had Matchbox was running, and we had great distribution across Europe in particular. And the chairman of Sega contacted me and said, "Hey, you guys got all this great distribution in Europe. Do you want to handle our 8-bit master system in Europe to distribute it?" And I said, well, I looked at it and I called him back. I knew him, by the way. I'd met him many times over the years. Uh, Sega in those years, when I was at Mattel, was owned by Paramount Pictures, reported to Mike Eisner and Barry Diller. And so I'd met this guy from Japan, Hayao Nakayama, as he was their senior VP in Japan. So I knew him. And I called him back. I said, no, not really, because frankly, I don't think you're that different from Nintendo. And I think you need a system that's much different from Nintendo. So I turned him down. Anyway, so we knew each other.
What
And
year approximately would this have been?
well, it would have been when I turned him down, it was probably about 1987, I think. And maybe 98 or 87 and 88, I think. And then I went on vacation in Hawaii with my family, and Nakayama-san tracked me down on the beach in Maui, and he said, "Okay, I know you don't want to do the 8-bit system. We've got a 16-bit system that we've developed, and I want you to take a look at. And we also have a handheld unit that has a color screen as opposed to Game Boy's black and white. I want you to take a look at. So come on back to Japan with me, and let's have another discussion." And I said, "No, I think I'll just lie here in Maui." And my daughter, who was maybe 6 at the time, I have 6 children, by the way, uh, she said, "Daddy, he came all the way from Japan. You've got to go with him." So I went back to Japan. And of course, he was right. I had never seen, and remember, I was familiar with Intellivision, I was familiar with Nintendo, and I was familiar with 8-bit. And I had never seen anything like 16-bit in a color handheld unit. And I was wowed. And so we negotiated a deal. I said, "Look, I know how you guys run companies from Japan. You have to make all the decisions in Tokyo. Well, that won't work for me. We've got to be able to make the decisions in the United States and in Western Europe." And so he agreed, and I went on board. And the rest, as they say, is history. But the similarities are hardware, software. Obviously, I'd already explained a little bit of that on from the toy industry, and also very aggressive advertising, which we always did at Mattel and did on many other toy lines. So that's why I joined.
Now, uh, so you were very, very familiar, no doubt, with the distribution channels, retail outlets for toys. What was the learning curve coming into video games? Obviously, you're still selling through certain toy outlets, but you also have a lot of other outlets that you can get into at this point. Was it difficult to build relationships with those retailers?
Not really. I mean, obviously the software, et ceteras, the Best Buys, the Circuit Cities. I guess all those are gone now, and and but the majority of the business was still with big retailers, Toys R Us, Walmart, with Target, and it was actually more difficult to get them to buy Sega because uh, Sega's sales force and marketing had not been that good. And I remember going to, well, all of them, but Target in particular said, well, you guys at Sega, you never live up to your commitments. So why the hell should we carry the line? Well, that was kind of a slap in the face. And I eventually convinced them that they should. And the hardest one was Walmart, which was really a shock for me because you have to understand, I grew up at Mattel. Walmart was everything for Mattel. Sam Walton loved Mattel. And partly because Mattel's sales lady was a very attractive Southern gal and named Etheline Garver. And Sam loved Etheline. And because of that, he took a shine to me. And I used to fly around with, Sam was a pilot. There was a landing strip behind Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, and he used to pilot the plane himself. And he would say, "Come on, Tom, let's go for a flight." And I'd go for a flight with him, and we'd fly over Walmart stores and in Arkansas and southern Missouri and way over into Texas. It wasn't that far, but anyway. And we'd count the cars in the parking lot. And God forbid there were more cars in a Kmart parking lot than a Walmart parking lot. But so Sam was a mentor to me, and I really liked him, and he liked me, uh, and it was really a shock that Walmart wouldn't carry Sega products. And so I started a campaign in Bentonville. I bought a retail store, or rented it actually, down the road from Walmart headquarters. I bought every billboard in and out of Bentonville on Highway 41, touting Sega. I bought all the TV and radio time I could. I bought the seat cushions in the University of Arkansas stadium, football stadium, and on one side it showed color, on the other side it said Sega, and it didn't say it, but it printed it. And so I did all this stuff, and I would call the buyer from Walmart, Rick somebody. I'd call, "Hey, Rick, you want you to know that last week in Toys R Us, we outsold Nintendo by 20% and at Target by 30%. Thought you'd want to know." Click. And I'd call him the next week and, "Hey, Rick, this week we outsold Nintendo." And I did that for a few weeks. And finally, one day the phone rings and it's Rick. And he says, "Okay, Kalinske, just stop it. My board is getting very upset with us not carrying Sega. Stop the advertising up and down the highways here in Bentonville, and we will give you 4 feet of space in Walmart stores." So that's how we got into Walmart. So interestingly, it was for me to get into software, Circuit City, and Best Buy than it was Walmart. But eventually we did. And of course, we prevailed.
Definitely. Now, the setup of getting into retail and having the product ready to go. Now, Sega also had to deal with the problem of third parties. So what was the challenge? What were the challenges you dealt with there? Because obviously you're coming from a world where there isn't a lot of third party software in toys.
Yeah, third parties was another challenge because why would they support Sega and get punished by Nintendo? And Nintendo very forcefully would say to a third party publisher, if you publish on the Sega system, you're not going to get any help from us, and we will limit the amount of third products you can make. So it was a very difficult situation, and we had court cases and everything else under the sun about that. But as part of the deal with Walmart, our 4 feet of space was to include pegs, if you will, for third-party titles, and so obviously that helped us get third-party support. Now, the one third party that supported us almost from the get-go was Electronic Arts. And Electronic Arts supported us right from the beginning because they didn't like Nintendo. And also, they had reverse engineered the Genesis system and said, we're going to publish on your system without paying you a royalty or anything. And we didn't like that idea very much because, you spend all this money developing hardware and building the market, and then you got this guy saying he's not going to pay you for doing software titles on your system. That was pretty painful. So we had to get through that, and we did eventually. We made a deal and this all started actually before I even joined Sega. The negotiations we started with Trip Hawkins and others at Electronic Arts. And obviously, they did Madden football, and Mad Football actually was the same engine that we did with Joe Montana football, and that was part of the deal to get them the rights as a third-party publisher. They helped us by helping develop through Joe Montana football. We helped them by getting them a lot of distribution on Madden, and Madden outsold. On the Sega system outsold Nintendo by a mile on the Sega system. So all of that was part of a negotiation. It was very difficult, but we got it all done. And then of course the other third parties started falling into place, and we had got lots and lots of support. Some of the Japanese companies were hard to please because they were so loyal to Nintendo, but eventually we got them. And of course we had, oh gosh, the remnants of Atari published with us, Tengen published with us. I'm going to forget lots of the different third parties that published with us, but eventually all of them did.
Yeah, and so that battle you had this. So after a struggle, you had the software support. You've got the client, the number of installed consoles increasing. Now, as soon as the battle begins between 16-bit consoles, because in the first couple of years it's just you guys versus the NES.
Yes.
Uh, Once the Super NES finally gets announced and you know it's coming, uh, what changes in your strategies? Because you're not going to be basically the only real 16-bit contender, the TurboGrafx 16 notwithstanding.
Right. Well, of course, we also, and I didn't mention it, and I should have, we were very aggressive in our advertising against Nintendo, and we positioned the NES as the little kid system, and we were the one for Big Brother, who was a teenager or college kid. And that worked very effectively. But we continued that strategy even we actually introduced the Super NES for Nintendo. We grabbed a bunch from Japan, brought them into the United States, and we'd set them up in shopping malls around the country. And we would have people demonstrating what a Super NES game looked like versus what a 16-bit Genesis game looked like. And then we would ask them which one they preferred after they got a chance to play with each. And we won that battle about 85% of the time. And so we introduced the Super NES for Nintendo, which didn't please them. And we continued with our very, very aggressive advertising against them. And we continued very aggressive advertising on the Game Gear, of course, also against the black and white Game Boy. And that seemed to really annoy, the Nintendo people did not like me at all. And would get a call every now and then from Howard Lincoln telling me to stop what we were doing in advertising or he's going to sue me. And apparently, the commercial we did on Game Gear that used my pet Airedale and said something about how Well, if you're like a dog and you can't see colors and only can see black and white, yeah, I guess you won't mind playing with a Game Boy. And then we'd show my Airedale drinking out of a toilet. And this really pissed Howard off. And he complained vociferously against us and threatened suits and all that, which never materialized to anything.
No, totally, totally. I can definitely see that. I can imagine Howard Lincoln fuming. That would be funny. So now you guys are still working through with Sega of Japan, and in Japan, Sega is not nearly as successful as Sega of America.
Yeah.
I'm that's a nice way of putting it, I guess. Just because they did not sell as nearly as many. What was your relationship with Japan, especially in light of that reality?
Well, initially it was very, very good. I mean, when I first joined, and in this story, I think everybody knows, and I went back to Japan and I said, okay, here's our 5 point plan. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to develop more software in the United States. We're going to do more American licenses. We're going to do sports licenses. We're going to do NFL football and MLB baseball and get FIFA soccer done by EA and we're going to advertise aggressively against uh, Nintendo, and we're going to lower the price of the hardware and all this stuff. And everybody in the boardroom in Japan, on the board, they're all Japanese, were started talking in Japanese, which I didn't understand, and I had my guy Shinobu Toyota translating in my ear, and he said, "Well, basically, they're basically saying they don't agree with anything you want to do, and they're wondering why you're here." And at that point, Nakayama stood up and said the same thing. He kicked over a chair and he said, "Nobody agrees with anything you want to do. But when I hired you, I said you can make the decisions for the United States. So go ahead and do your 5 point plan." So my initial they didn't like me, but they grew to love me because we were successful. But Nakayama, after a while, we were, as you know, we grew our share of market to over 50% and past Nintendo and share of market in the United States. Well, Nakayama used to then go into the so-called decision room every Monday morning and beat the hell out of the executives, the Sega Japan executives, the marketing executives, the sales executives, the product development executives, and say, "Why can't you do what Tom's doing in the United States?" Well, if you get beaten up every Monday morning for month after month after month, eventually you decide, "I don't really like this guy Tom very much." And I didn't understand that was going on, of course, because I was in the United States. But instead of having a lot of cooperation from Japan, all of a sudden things were different. I wasn't getting the cooperation, I wasn't getting the help, I wasn't getting the programming help. Oh, and of course, we introduced Sonic very successfully, and they never were all that successful in Japan. And the whole Sonic team then moved to Sega Technical Institute in the United States, which I think annoyed the Japanese developers all the more. So a lot of things happened that changed the relationship over the years. And I didn't understand that until, frankly, after I had left Sega.
Oh wow. Okay. I had a couple of follow-up questions. When you're talking about going back first to Mattel, now you became president of was it president or CEO of Mattel in '85?
I, I was president. Remember, Mattel was a conglomerate back then.
Hmm.
So they owned like 10 different companies. The toy company was the largest of the entities. I was president of the toy company in 1985. I became
Okay.
CEO after the disaster. Well, we had to sell everything off. I mean, as you know, in television went to hell in
Hmm.
'82 or '83, but Western Publishing went to hell. Turco Tubular Steel Company went to hell. Metaframe Pet Supplies went to hell. Um, I'm forgetting a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had to refinance the company, and I was the only surviving president. So they made me co
Hmm.
CEO with my friend John Ammerman, and we had to go get refinanced. and Drexel Burnham was the place we went because our banks would no longer talk to us, frankly. Bankers don't like it when, if you have 10 subsidiaries and 9 of them go to hell, they don't care you got one that's making profits. They think you're idiots. So they don't want to finance you. So we had to go to Drexel Burnham, and Mike Milken famously said, Barbie should never go bankrupt. I'll refinance you in 36 hours. And he did.
It's yeah. I mean, those are just big. That's a big name in the history of finance, for many reasons. So okay, I was just wanted to get that timeline clear in my head. And so now, prior to the big collapse in '83 of
Uh-huh.
the video game market,
Right.
you were obviously in the toy division. What was the perception at the time inside of Mattel of the importance or the effect of Mattel Electronics?
Great question. Well, first of all, uh, the electronics division started from the toy division. The guys who invented the handheld electronic race game, the handheld football game, the handheld tank game, all were people who worked for me in R&D. Mike Katz
Ah,
worked in marketing for me. So anyway, the board decided that video games were too important a new division to have within the toy company, so they spun it out as a separate company. And it didn't even stay in their same location. We were at 5150 Rosecrest. They moved it way down the street into a new building, and
mm,
that's where it was. So the perception that and I knew all the people that were working on video games, and so my perception was, God, it's grown fantastically, but I, being a guy who spent a lot of years close to retailers, I'm hearing from retailers, from Toys R Us, from Walmart, from Kmart, from Target, that video game sales are backing up. And this was at the beginning of when Atari started going downhill. And I was still on the board, obviously, of Mattel Inc., the conglomerate.
mm.
And I would go into these board meetings. I say, well, it's wonderful. It's so sales are so strong right now, but inventory is backing up at retail, and that is not a good thing. When that happens, usually sales start to decline. And the then CEO of all of Mattel, I won't mention his name, he was a guy from a tobacco company, so he knew a lot about toys. He tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "That's very nice, Tom. Just stick with your toys, and we'll take care of Mattel Electronics." And they
Oh,
sure did. So obviously, when Atari went to hell, and television went to hell, and I was really pissed off because the warning signs were there. We could have taken actions that we couldn't have stopped the decline, but we sure as hell would not have had to take this $350 million loss or whatever the hell it was. And, it was unnecessary. But so I was pretty bitter about the whole thing. And it's some of the executives within the electronics division who, frankly, I don't think they understood what happens when you leave tons of inventory at retail. Yeah. Anyway, short story.
well, I mean, I can also imagine that for the retailers, there was no distinction between Mattel Electronics and Mattel, even though maybe internally, especially if it was a tobacco guy running it, he's like, well, they're separate corporations. Obviously, these are not the same
Right.
thing.
Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and it cost me some friendly relationships that I had with retailers. Like, why the hell didn't you tell them what was going on? Well, I tried, but I couldn't be heard. Yeah, so that you're right. They said, hey, you're Mattel. Period. I don't care if you're
Hmm.
electronics, toys, pet supplies, or what. You're Mattel. So
Hmm.
I know, and I understand that. And so I had to take my lumps too.
Gotcha. No, I can only imagine how difficult that must have been. The uh, and the looking back at that, then, so when you are basically co-running the ship in 85 and 86, 87. Uh, are you, I'm guessing you're majorly preoccupied with just making sure Mattel stays afloat. Uh,
Absolutely.
is
Yeah,
there one?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of us were involved in, okay, how do we sell Western publishing and who do we sell it to? And, all that banking stuff that's involved in a transaction like that. And the same thing with every entity. And I don't even, I remember we sold Western publishing to Richard Bernstein, but for like Mattel Electronics, I mean, it was desperation time. It was get whatever the hell you can. And I don't even remember. I should remember the names of the people we sold it to because I know them very well. But right now I can't remember them. I'm 81, so
No
it's
problem.
tough. But anyway, we sold it for pennies, pennies, pennies on the dollar for what we could get out of it. And then later on, I know they resurrected it to some degree. What's his name? Resurrected it and made some money off of it. So good for him.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the Intellivision brand is kept alive. I believe Atari owns it now, curiously enough. But
Isn't that funny? What's his
but
name? Tommy Tellerico or something like that?
Tommy Tallarico tried to bring it back with the Amico project, and the Amico project is now going ahead just as the Amico project, and they've sold the Intellivision branding to Atari, which is not really the Atari of old. It's the French company Infogrames. They bought
Yeah.
Atari like 20 years ago, and they've renamed themselves Atari. So yeah,
Oh God,
it's
that is so funny. Well, not that many years ago, maybe 7 years ago. I'm friends with Nolan Bushnell, and so
oh.
Nolan and a couple of guys called me up and said, "Hey," and at that time, 7 or 8 years ago, the entire brand was doing nothing. He said, "Hey, we
Hmm.
should try to buy Atari back from the French." And he explained to me how bad the business was, and there was very little left, and there's just some licensing and what have you.
Hmm.
And so I didn't go with him, but Nolan flew to, I think, initially London and then Paris to meet with the French that owned the Atari brand. And Nolan's a pretty imposing big guy and very smart, and he'll tell you to this day he's got more ideas for video games in his brain than they have on the market. Anyway, so he goes over there, and and of course the at the time the brand was in terrible terrible shape. Their board of directors was mostly French guys who were all friends of this one financier. And as I
Hmm.
recall the story, I may get these numbers wrong, but the French chairman, was making something like 750,000 euros a year. And he had a bunch of his buddies on the board, and they're all getting paid. And the company's losing money hand over fist. And they were getting financed out of some private equity funds over there. And Nolan goes over and he says to them, "You're running this into the ground. There's nothing going to be left. You should let me buy it, take it off your hands, and I will turn it around because I have lots of ideas for video games." And the French chairman apparently said to him, "You mean you want me to give up my 750,000 euros a year salary and so you can run the company?" And Nolan said, "Yeah, that's what I want you to do." It didn't go over very well. Anyway.
Oh my goodness. I can totally see a Frenchman responding that way. I totally can.
Well, and apparently not realizing how desperate the situation was for the company and how bad off it was, and maybe not respecting that Nolan, he was the founder, close to the founder of the video games industry.
Yeah, I mean yeah, no, I can imagine. I haven't spoken to Nolan yet. And he's one of those interviews I still need to get at some point, but he I having him not active at some level in the industry just feels wrong,
Well,
you know.
especially then to help
Yeah.
recreate it. And by the way, when you do get in hold of him, He's worse than I am on starting a meeting on time.
Um, that from everything I've heard about him from people who have interviewed him, that jives. That totally
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Another follow-up question I had about your time at Mattel. Uh, so during this struggle to keep the company alive, it coincides obviously with 85 is the soft launch of the NES in New York, 86 the nationwide rollout. Does that register at that time with you that Nintendo is doing this, or is it just something that is so tangential and off to the side that it's of no real import given the struggles that you had?
Well, I was obviously aware of it, and frankly, I was, God, more power to him, trying to, because it was a big industry and it shouldn't go to zero. Um, but I had my own issues, and I had to get Masters of the Universe launched. I had to continue with Barbie and Hot Wheels. I had to do the Masters of the Universe television show and a movie and Princess of Power and all that. So I was pretty busy and not, I mean, I was aware of it, but not paying a lot of attention to
No, that perfectly makes sense. Since you just talked about the television show,
it.
Masters of the Universe, and I know we talked about it a little bit last time, and it is something I need to talk about just because, yeah, very influential. By the way, since we last spoke, I showed the very first episode to my daughter. She's 5. Oh, she fell in love with it. Oh, she's just like,
Really?
oh yeah, she's just yeah, took her in.
Oh, that's
So
great.
yeah, I mean, and there's a ton of toys in the store again, at least over here in Europe. So I mean,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
yeah. Okay, so I have to ask, 83 the show launches.
Yep.
The 84-85 television season sees an absolute flood of TV of toy-based cartoon shows. An
Yep.
absolute flood. GoBots, Transformers, My Little Pony, etc., etc. Uh, at at the time, uh, how did you guys perceive that wave of shows? How did it change the way shows were marketed? And Mattel, I know Mattel has a few more of those coming down the pipeline, like Brave
Oh,
Star
a
and so
lot more
forth.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't seem like there were a lot of follow-up shows from Mattel in the 84, 85, 85, 86, or 85, 86, already a few more. Did it catch you by surprise that so many other brands followed the trend, or what was that like?
The toy industry is the greatest copycat industry in the world. So if you have something successful, you can bet 8 other companies are going to try to do the same thing. Now, the unique approach we had was giving the show away free
Hmm.
and benefiting from the being able to have some return to us for our either our use or our sale spots within each half hour episode. And we took the spots, and as I mentioned to you before, we used some on Hot Wheels. But we sold most of them to McDonald's and Kellogg's and whoever. And of course, the price that you can sell on is based on the ratings. Well, the ratings, I think we financed the show assuming a 1 rating or something like that. I may have these numbers wrong, but whatever it was, the ratings were 10 times what we thought they were going to be. And therefore, we made a profit off of selling the show, which we never expected. So, of course, every other toy company is going to say, oh, well, that looks like a good thing to do. Let's copy it. And so they did. And, at one time, I actually was negotiating for the rights for what became GoBots out of Bandai in Japan. And, of course, Transformers came out of Takara in Japan. And it would have been great to have had all 3 of those and Masters of the Universe, but I didn't get that. I didn't get that done. But obviously, we did do uh, Princess of Power. Adam's little sister Shira, and Prince Adam's little sister Shira, and we did also cooperate with. I'm going to get this wrong too. American Greeting on Popple's
Hmm.
TV show, and Hallmark on Rainbow Bright kids
Oh,
TV
that's right.
show.
Yeah.
And so we were very much involved in all of that. So we were involved in a couple of other television shows. We tried to launch something, and I can't remember exactly the year. Captain Power. Do you remember Captain Power?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yes,
So
with
and
the
there
laser light or something. There
yeah,
was,
yeah.
yeah.
The toys would interact with the television show. So when the television show, the enemy fired a laser at Captain Power, your toy, your vehicle in front of the TV would start moving and react with it. Seemed like a pretty interesting idea.
Mm.
Failed terribly, but anyway, seemed like an interesting idea. Oh God! And then we also tried. I'm going to forget these.
Mm.
Brave Star. We
Yeah.
did Brave Star during the same period of time. That wasn't successful either. So just having a television show doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a successful toy line. You have to have in my opinion,
Mm.
as we did with Masters, you have to have a successful toy first, and then do the television show if it merits the. It all comes down to storyline. How good are the stories?
Mm.
Are they compelling? Do kids react to the stories well? And fortunately, in the cases of many of the Mattel properties, they did, and of course now they're going like TV crazy. I mean, they're going to do a TV series on Uno, the game Uno. How the hell? I can hardly wait to see that. I don't know how they do it. But anyway, and of course they've done a number on some of the other lines they have there now. I'm forgetting all the names of the lines, but the small doll line they have there, they're doing a TV show on that. They're doing Hot Wheels.
Mm.
Um, I don't think they would introduce a toy today if they didn't think they could do a TV show on it.
Yeah. And I mean, Masters set the tone for that, having the storyline and everything else delivered with that. It just made the toys more complex. I mean, it fascinated me, and the idea, the fact that this I can go to the store right now and buy a trap jaw just speaks volumes.
Oh gosh.
Okay, now, so moving on from Mattel, I did have a follow-up question about the Sega Technical Institute.
Yes.
So, because we did talk about that a little bit. Now, whose idea was it to set up that studio? That studio?
That's a great question. I think it was my right arm, Shinobu Toyota.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was here in the U.S. He's still here in the U.S. Even though he's Japanese, and he heard. Of course, he spoke Japanese, which was a huge advantage that I didn't have. And he heard that the Sega Sonic team in Japan was unhappy, and I guess some of them were resigning. And so he went over to Japan, and he convinced the chairman Nakayama-san that if he could get this team to come to the U.S., that we could keep them employed and working on the next Sonic games, if you will, plural. And so he did that, and he met with Naka and Oshino, and I'm forgetting all the names. Anyway, he convinced them to come to to Northern California here. I mean, their office was separate from our Sega America office, but it was like a mile away. It's very close
Mm.
by. And Mark Cerny and Roger Hector ran
Mm.
the Sega Technical Institute, and now had a company, a Sega Tech STI, where more than half the employees coming because he brought all these guys from Japan and were Japanese, and the other a little less than half were U.S. guys. And it was a great combination, in my opinion. Now, they
Mm.
certainly had their issues. I mean, there were a lot of cultural issues on how you work and how long you work and how long does it take to do a game and what have you. All that stuff was difficult. But Shinobu helped manage it. Roger Hector certainly managed it,
Mhm.
and Mark Cerny is brilliant. And so they figured it out. Uh, I know there were storylines on Sonic 2 that were disputed, if you will, by the Japanese guys at STI. And my head of marketing, Al Nilsson, who's really the granddaddy of Sonic, he had to go over there and explain to them the story that he really wanted for Sonic. And apparently he was so persuasive, most of the Japanese guys got very tearful over it and thought this was absolutely brilliant, where this guy Al wanted to take Sonic and agreed with everything he wanted to do. And hence it became a very uh, profitable relationship, if you will.
Uh, my favorite Sega game of the 16-bit era, Comic Zone, comes out of that. So,
Oh yeah,
as
yeah,
far as I'm concerned, it was a huge success.
yeah. I think Mark Cerny had a lot to do with that.
Oh, really?
Have you ever
Okay.
talked to him?
Yeah, he's one of those people who's so deep in the industry nowadays. I think he's still over at Sony, right? I
I
think he's
believe
at
so.
Sony. Yeah.
They put him in charge of hardware, which to me was very
Yeah.
strange because he's really a game guy. I mean, I
Hmm.
think the first game he did, he was like 17 or something. He did Marble Madness.
Madness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolute genius. But yeah, I've put out feelers to get a hold of him, but he's just not available. I've spoken to Roger Hector, and he had some fun stories to tell about
I'm sure he
STI.
did.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. And I'm currently, parallel to my conversations with you, I'm also talking to Al Nielsen. So
Oh, good.
yeah, we haven't gotten that deep into it yet. That's sort of the next conversation. But yeah, it'll be sort of like a Sega doubleheader, if you will. Uh, okay, so that was my Sega Technical Institute, and the final follow-up question, because we didn't really talk about it, was the Sega Arcade division.
Uh-huh.
So how when you arrived at Sega of America, uh, we already had the Genesis launched, but just barely, if you will. You had to still get it into Walmart. Uh, but what was the condition of the arcade division? How important was it to the operation, and where did you see its place in Sega of America as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the crazy thing about this was initially I didn't pay a lot of attention, frankly. I mean, I liked the idea of successful arcade products becoming consumer products, obviously. I mean, you got a lot of people in the arcades, they play well, they're eating up quarters like crazy, so why not? I mean, that's the same idea that Nolan had when he formed Atari. Anyway, so I liked it, and it strangely enough it reported to me, and at least that was the promise, the commitment. But I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it initially. And I only paid attention to it when the guy who ran it, oh gosh, here we go on names again. Tom. Oh, anyway, when he would call me up and they had an issue or what have you, and I would try to help them out on it. I would go to some of the conventions. I think Al and I were at an arcade convention in New Orleans uh, when we had the video game boxing fiasco with Vander Holyfield. But anyway, um,
Sounds like we need to talk about that.
oh, you talked to Al about that.
Okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
so I tried Tom Pettit. So I tried to help him when I could, and I encouraged them to do the right uh, arcade games from Japan, not take any old thing, but let's get the right ones here and make sure they're successful. And he worked with the. It's a funny industry because they all work very closely together. He worked very closely with Midway. Um,
Mm.
so so it was an okay relationship. It's just that even though on paper it reported to me, I'm a consumer products guy. I'm not a, you know, in arcade thing guy where they're in the movie theaters and some are independent. And I would go to their grand openings when they had them in New York or wherever, in a new arcade in Times Square or what have you. Um, and certainly the theme park idea was appealing to me, and they did a good job of recruiting the right people for that, I thought. In fact, in my office here somewhere, I have a note from Steven Spielberg, who was working with them, and hope we're all successful together and stuff like that. So, so I think they were trying to do the right things.
That was always seemed to be an odd fit, especially because of the size of the industry. I mean, it wasn't nearly as big revenue wise as console. And over time, I mean, especially during that 16-bit period, the types of games that would be successful in the arcade didn't always translate well to
Right.
home consoles.
Right, right.
Or
As they went into hologram games and much more sophisticated games, games where two motorcycles next to each other and they're on a motorized seat where they're going to move and it's going to feel like they're really flying through the air or flying down the road and racing against each other on a big screen in front of them. Stuff like that was initially hard. Over time, I think we figured out a lot of it. But you're right. It was a much smaller industry and a strange industry. A lot of these arcade people they're like running bars. It was different.
well, you're dealing with the same guy who's also, putting well, cigarette machines by '90s were kind of out, but it's he's got his Coke machine, and he's also got like 5 arcade games that have to go into a 7-Eleven or something.
Yeah,
It's a very different setup.
very different.
Okay, so that brings us back to those were just my follow-up questions. So we
Oh
left
gosh.
off. Sorry. It's when we left off, you were talking about how you weren't aware at the time of the shaky relationship between Sega of America and Sega of Japan, that you weren't fully aware of some of the problems that were brewing between the way that Sega of Japan was viewing Sega of America. So I have to ask, as the Genesis is really taking off, 91, 92, 93 in the United States, and is becoming this very, very powerful player, and that success is not being repeated in Japan, uh, what forms did that break in the relationship begin to manifest itself?
Well, I think initially it was all fine. Everybody loved everybody. I mean, obviously the folks in Japan were delighted with our success initially, and and I think they were begrudgingly even over time. But what they didn't like was this fact that I mentioned to you before. I think that Nakayama-san had this way of managing where he'd go into the decision room every Monday and he'd talk about Sega of America's now got a 40% share of the market, and we only have 10% here in Japan. What the hell's going on? Or they're wildly successful with Sonic, and we're not yet. And after a while, you get beat up like that. It starts to change your attitude toward the guys in the U.S. And I did not realize that for quite a while. I mean, when I would go over there, and I went over many times every year, I was always treated really respectfully, and things were fine. But I learned later that behind the scenes they were saying, "God damn that guy! Why, why are we being blamed when we can't do what he's doing?" And so it's a natural reaction, I think. But
Hmm.
anyway, that's about all I can say about it. I mean, I understand the human psychology. And initially, though, 90, 91, 92, 93, I think everything was fine. It was after that where it just got to him a little bit.
Gotcha. Now, I do have to talk also now about the expansion of the Genesis line. So this Sega CD, for example.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, was the concept of adding the CD player something that was coming out of Japan? Was this like the Japanese saying, "Hey, we have this new piece of tech," or was it something an idea that came more out of Sega of America to expand the line to keep the product fresh?
It's a great question. First of all, dealing with ROM cartridges was the world that we lived in, and they were expensive and they were limited in how much memory they had. So we all knew as games progressed and you started to add in full mission video and better music and what have you, you needed much more memory. So we all knew the world was eventually going to go to an optical disc, and that it was just a matter of time. So Joe Miller, I've spoken about him before, my head of R&D, brilliant, brilliant guy. Unfortunately, he's passed away of cancer, but he was very much, we got to figure out how to program great video games on an optical disc. And it's not the same as doing it on a cartridge. And so I think he was in collaboration with the folks in Japan, and I think everybody had this same view. We got to figure out how to do this, and so we probably pushed the button a little bit sooner than they did in Japan. I mean, we wanted to get ahead of the game, and so we really pushed for having the Sega CD attachment to the Genesis. And by the way, I still think that was the right thing to do because we didn't know how to program on a until we practiced doing it. And so I think it
Hmm.
was, I mean, back, gosh, I know, I still don't quite understand how they manage it today. But back in those days, you had to download from the CD disc to memory on the machine that could access that memory because you couldn't skip around on the disc and have it work. So it was kind of complicated. So I'm not sure I can answer that question. I think it was kind of the everything is in the air. We know what's going to happen. We got to get there. So let's get ahead of the game and let's try it. And I still believe, even though the Genesis CD was not wildly successful, I think it was absolutely necessary for the future of Sega.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it needed to happen. And cartridge sizes just couldn't keep growing. And the technical aspect needed to be learned. On the computer side, they were dealing with the same thing with floppy disks for years.
Oh my gosh,
Uh,
yes.
yeah. So now the launch of the Sega CD and the price point of it, the need to have a Genesis beforehand, obviously creates a bit of a, I guess it's you can't buy the accessory without having the original console.
Right.
So how was there skepticism from retail about the add-on at that point, or how did that pitch work?
Yeah. By the way, there was skepticism about any add-on to a hardware platform. Any. I mean, other than having an extra hand controller. I mean, it was very, very uh, well. There hadn't been many examples of big successes with add-on devices, and so there's certainly a lot of skepticism, and retail certainly was as well. But on the other hand, thank God we at that point in time had enough strength in the market to push it through and to get it in distribution. And the funny thing to me is I still get lots of notes from former, maybe current game players who say, "Hey, Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega CD was the best game ever."
I mean, it's one of those ones that even on handheld still holds up wonderfully.
Yeah.
Uh, so the so it launches and it sells. What was? Do you have any idea what the attachment rate was?
It wasn't huge. It wasn't that high. And if I'm in a different upstairs office, my home office is actually downstairs in the back of the house. Somewhere I probably have that information, but I don't have it up here.
No problem. And so the question is, so you have this base out there, and you have a model for licensing. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, each third-party publisher had to pay a license fee per cartridge being manufactured, correct? With
Right.
the a few exceptions for certain companies like EA that we discussed.
EA had a different deal.
A
Yeah.
deal. Now, given the smaller attachment rate of the Sega CD and the much lower cost of manufacturing for individual units of a CD, did you try to make it more attractive to third-party publishers to make CD games by lowering those fees, or was there a very different fee structure?
I don't remember all the details. I thought it was just a straight royalty kind of license fee off of the CD. But that's a great question. That if you ever get hold of Shinobu Toyota or Al Nielsen, they probably would remember the details of that. But I think we did try to make it more attractive because we certainly wanted to encourage them to move in that direction because we knew the industry was going to.
The Sega CD comes out, I believe, in 93, if memory serves me right. 92 or 93?
93, I think. Yeah.
93, yeah. And so going into Christmas of 94, we have the 32X with the
Hmm.
Sega Saturn launching in Japan. Now, I have to ask about the it's been documented and talked about a million times before. We don't have to belabor it probably too much, but I do need to ask about it. So the relatively parallel evolution of these two machines and the decision to launch the Saturn first in Japan.
Yeah.
Why? Given
Well, I
given the
think I
fact that Sega has virtually no presence in the Japanese console market, why does the Saturn get launched in Japan first?
well, needless to say, I had no influence over what they did in Japan. However, and I've been wildly criticized for the 32X launch. But remember what I was trying, I didn't like, in my head of R&D, who I respected so much, Joe Miller, we thought the architecture for Saturn needed to be better. And so we wanted to keep Genesis alive as long as possible, buying time, and maybe things would get better for the Saturn. So that's why we did 32X. It was a stopgap measure to try to continue the life of Genesis. And, you know, decision we made that decision and we lived with it. And the whole Saturn debacle was a debacle, basically. I mean, God, you imagine being in. Did I ever tell you the story about Jim Clark and who ended up founding Netscape and while he was at
No,
Silicon Graphics?
no.
Okay, so Jim lives near me here in Atherton, and he at the time was chairman of Silicon Graphics, high powered computers for special effects. The whole movie industry relied on brilliant graphics and sound and what have you. So he calls me up and he says, "Hey, we've got this chipset here at Silicon Graphics, new one that I think is great for a video game system. Why don't you come over and take a look at it?" So Joe Miller and I go over. It's down 101, closer to San Jose, and he was right. The It was incredible. We thought it was absolutely wonderful. So we call up Japan and say, "Hey, you guys got to come and take a look at this chipset because it's probably a lot better than what we're doing in the Saturn." And they begrudgingly send some guys over who look at it and they say, "Oh, well, yeah, it's got great graphics, great special effect abilities, great sound, but it's too big of a chip and there'll be too much throw off waste in manufacturing. So we're not going to do it." and we're doing Saturn. So I called Jim up and I say, well, we're responsible for software and marketing here in the US, but I don't have much control over hardware. So Sega's not going to do it. And he says, well, Tom, what should I do now? And I said, well, there's this other company up in Seattle you might want to go talk to. So they did. But anyway, guess who the developer of that chipset was for Jim Clark at Silicon Graphics?
I have no idea.
Jensen Huang,
That name sounds awfully familiar. Why do I know
the
that name?
founder of NVIDIA.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. Yeah,
Isn't
makes
that
sense.
unbelievable? Isn't that unbelievable? So I'm the guy that introduced Jensen Huang to Sega. And later, after I had left the company, Jensen became good friends with Irimajiri-san, who for a while came to the U.S. after I had left to run the U.S., but then went back to Japan. And he and Jensen, I think they're still very good friends. So isn't that funny? Small world.
Very. Okay, so at at what point or how early in the development of the Saturn do you start to get a bad feeling about where it's going?
Well, remember, I'm obviously not a technical person. So most of my feelings reflected those of Joe Miller's. And he was
Hmm.
very concerned. And a lot of it was stuff that seems so obvious today. I mean, Joe was really big on the early development of the internet. And he said, hey, whatever system we do next has got to be internet compatible. We've got to be able to have games that we can not only play because we can download them from the internet, but that we can share with other people, stuff like that. And Saturn didn't have that, and he didn't think Saturn's graphics were as good as they should have been, and lots of. So I only reflected Joe's feelings,
Hmm.
frankly, because I'm not that technical. But it was early on in the development for sure, and needless to say, they did listen to us. And many people
Ah,
think we're wrong. Many people today think the Saturn was one of the best systems that Sega ever did. So,
no. Sorry. I, I as someone
well, you don't get
as
all the mail I get.
let me just put it this way, as someone who worked at software etc the Christmas of 95, I can tell you, seeing the two display units
Oh
next
my
to one
God.
another and just watching people's faces is like, oh yeah, that's Virtua Fighter, sort of. And oh, these guys have the
Sort of.
T-Rex demo. The T-Rex demo is like that
Oh
sold
God.
it. It was,
I didn't
yeah.
know you worked for software, etc. Oh,
Only
that's
for
so
the one
interesting.
Christmas. Only I
Oh my gosh.
right before
Oh,
that.
I'm terrible at names these days, but the president of software, etc., was who at those times?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I was just a guy in
Oh,
retail, but oh,
well,
what's his?
anyway, he was a really good guy, and he's one of the people that actually got me interested in ever playing golf, which I
Oh,
will
really?
never forgive him for. But anyway,
Uh, yeah, I mean, the whole retail side of it is another thing that is so poorly documented, unfortunately.
yeah,
There's very
yeah.
few interviews with the heads of those companies. I've tried to put feelers out. I know who you're talking about because I've tried to contact a lot of these guys, but yeah, they don't give a lot of interviews, unfortunately.
No, and then you
Um,
had Babbage's back in those days,
oh
and
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
I
gosh,
believe I was talking the co-founder of Acclaim. Oh, the gentleman's name is Fishbach. Uh,
Gregory Fishbach.
Greg
Yeah,
Fishbach, a great guy. And he called them always the three sisters. It was Software Etc., Babbage's, and Electronics Boutique. And he
Electronics
always
Boutique.
refers
That's
to them
right.
as the three sisters. It was like you had to
Yeah,
sell through to the three sisters.
yeah.
Um, okay, so so we've got Saturn coming down the pipeline. You guys want to keep the Genesis alive in the hopes that the Saturn situation gets better. Uh, you guys had no control over the fact that it was going to launch a year earlier in Japan than in the
Oh
United States.
no, we didn't. And for our launch, we were planning. We weren't planning. We were told we were going to launch it in September, and then right before the June show, Nakayama said, "Well, you've got to introduce it right now." Oh, why? Well, because Sony's going to introduce, and they're 32-bit, so we got to introduce it now. And I said, but we don't have any software. He said, well, I don't care. We got to get out. Anyway, so we had to introduce it at too high a price with not even enough hardware and certainly not enough software. And so the whole thing was it was going to be a disaster and was a disaster. And frankly was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was really the reason I left the company.
Yeah, the infamous E3
Yeah.
announcement. Uh, I do just going two steps before that though. So you have the Japanese launch of the two systems. Sony comes out of the gate very strong in Japan with their system. You guys have the 32X in the United States, Christmas of '94. And the I'm trying to phrase this. So 32X hits said basically at the same time as Nintendo is coming out with super expensive cartridges like Donkey Kong Country, where they're just piling on memory and extra chips and stuff into the
Yeah.
cartridges. You guys are going in my opinion, more reasonable route of just buy the extra chips once and then the individual games won't have to be as expensive. Uh, what was that the marketing concept
Yes.
of it? And how do you feel the success of bringing that message to the public was?
Well, it obviously couldn't have been too successful because we weren't that successful with it. But I thought it was strategically the right thing to do, and the overreaching strategy, of course, I still believed in was keeping Genesis alive longer. Do whatever we can to do that. I still think that was correct, and I think it would have made more money for the company as well, and as keeping a lot of consumers happier. But anyway, yeah. So you have an add-on that's got the extra horsepower, and now you can do cartridges that don't need to have all that extra horsepower in them, and yet they will look better than they would have without a 32X. So that was the basic strategy. And of course, I mean, I think some of the games I guess Doom looked better.
Hmm.
Was one that people liked a lot. We just didn't have enough. We didn't have enough, and that was also a downfall.
Hmm. Now, so you get to E3, that launch is basically forced upon you. Now, some of the writings of both the time and now in retrospect that I've been able to dig up about Sega of Japan, there was the whole issue that under Japanese law at the time, it was possible for, or most of the companies did not report consolidated earnings. And so it's my understanding that Sega of Japan was actually reporting sales of inventory to Sega of America as sell-through numbers, or
Oh
putting it
God.
down, and 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 that becomes a blowback issue later on for Sega of Japan. Uh, how aware of you were how aware were you of that situation at the time, and did that have an influence on that E3 decision?
Uh, I
Or,
wasn't that aware, and no, it didn't. Oh
okay.
God, that's a. I didn't realize that. I mean, I'm used to U.S. accounting and GAAP and what have you, and we have when I was at Mattel or other companies, we had subsidiaries around the world, and yeah, that just seems very, very
Yeah, they didn't
bizarre.
actually change it until the early 2000s.
Wow.
Uh, but it's sorry, I'm a lawyer by trade. It's one of those things that I've done some deep dives on, and yes, it's considered by some in the legal profession to be the reason for the Japanese funk for the last 30 years or 25
Yeah.
years at this point, was because they had these consolidated earnings, and yeah, many industries were hit by this. So Nintendo, curiously enough, when they went on the stock market in 82, I believe, they did do consolidated earnings. They
Ah,
prop When they jumped on, they actually took the option of doing fully consolidated, and that's why their numbers were always solid.
well,
Um,
Howard Lincoln, of course, is a lawyer and a very smart lawyer, and I bet he influenced that a lot.
it wouldn't surprise me. It would not surprise me that he told them right from the get-go, do not go this route. But yeah, that's a conversation I would love to have, but he is not returning my phone calls,
Oh,
unfortunately. But okay, so you're forced into this position now where you are launching a product early, you're not at all the retailers. How did retail react to the E3 announcement?
well, they they obviously reacted negatively. I mean, our price was too high. We didn't have enough hardware for them. We didn't have enough software for them. It cost me a lot of friendships and I'm sure a lot of reputation because, as I recall it, I mean, people like, not that KB was the biggest retailer in the world, they weren't,
Mm.
but they were good friends of mine. And I could not even, they wanted to support us, but we didn't have enough hardware to support them. We hardly had enough for the so-called Three Sisters and Toys R Us. I mean, it was a ridiculous situation, and a lot of those guys, I think to this day, are still mad at me over. Uh, I probably saved them their bonuses for that year because if we had shipped them, it wouldn't have sold through. But anyway, it, we couldn't even supply them the hardware, much less the software that they wanted. It was a disaster. The marketing was a disaster. Nothing made sense. And again, as I said earlier, that was one of the reasons why I had decided at that point I had to leave the company. It was no longer the right environment for me.
Understood. Uh, did did that decision was that decision uh sort of a sea change in the independence of Sega of America, or was that a trend that had been coming for a while?
Well, it had been coming, but it certainly was manifested itself in this ordering us to do this crazy thing
Mm.
of introducing the Saturn early, and and it was kind of interesting because when I made the decision, I told it to Nakayama-san, I think right shortly after E3, and he said, "Oh, okay, but you got to stay with the company until I think it was October or something." And I agreed to that, which I probably shouldn't have. But anyway, I agreed to that, so that's why I stayed on for 4 months.
Gotcha. Now, and that would have been October of 96?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so Saturn launches. So at this point, you essentially have five platforms running simultaneously. You've got the Game Gear, the
Right.
Genesis, the 32X, the Sega CD, and the
And
Saturn.
Saturn. Yeah.
Uh, that must have been a lot to juggle.
It was. It was hard. It was hard to juggle, and obviously more than we could handle. We needed to, but I didn't want to shut down the Genesis, so I was in a pickle there, and I certainly didn't
Mm.
want to shut down Game Gear. So it was a very difficult period of time. People say, "Well, why don't you just stop doing 32X?" Well, because I wanted to keep Genesis alive longer. So it was a hard time.
Gotcha. Now, the Saturn, the Saturn software, or there's something we have to talk about, another lifeline, if you will, for the Genesis, which was Sega. the Sega Channel.
Oh God, I love
And
this channel.
as I didn't have it myself, I didn't have a Genesis, unfortunately. I was a computer gamer, but a good buddy of mine did have it, and I just remember the fascination with, ooh, which game do we play now? Ooh, there's a list and stuff.
Yeah.
It was a phenomenal
And you
experience.
didn't have to go to retail to buy it, or yeah, it was
It was
amazing.
just there. I do have to ask. I mean, so you're setting this up. You're negotiating with cable companies
Yep.
to provide the service. How does the licensing of the software, because you didn't just have Sega titles on it, how did that negotiation work? I mean, were the third-party publishers very receptive to this, or were they more reluctant to get their software on the service?
Well, some were, some weren't. I mean, it depended on who, and I don't remember who was which, but it depended. I mean, I think people wanted the exposure, but as you remember, back in those days, there was still a lot of controversy over the whole idea of renting a video game. There were some of the third parties who didn't want their games rented at the predominant renter, Blockbuster, at the time. They didn't want them in the stores. And I, of course, had the opposite opinion. I felt that if you make a good enough game that somebody wants to rent it over a weekend and they like it, they're going to get tired of renting it. They're going to buy it. So it's going to help retail sales. And of course, with the Sega channel, I kind of felt the same way because we were rotating games in and out of the channel. The channel, by the way, that's another whole nother story. There's a lot of stories around it, actually. I'll tell you two quick ones. So we're negotiating with the cable guys, and the first one we deal with is Time Warner, and they have a lot of cable systems around the country, and we're making a deal with them. And of course, the guy we hired to run the Sega channel, Stan Thomas, came out of Time Warner, and so we had a good relationship there, and we're getting a deal done. And I get a call from TCI. This is like getting a call from the mafia. And they say, "We hear you're doing this deal with Time Warner. Well, you've got to deal with us too, or else." Well, I wasn't quite sure what or else was, but I knew that John Malone ran TCI, and he was a big guy and a tough guy and a billionaire. And so we met with. These guys showed up, and here we are in Northern California. These guys show up in black suits and ties. It was like, where the hell are these people from? Anyway, so it turned out to be a great advantage, though, because we did a deal with TCI and Time Warner, hence covering like 85% of the United States.
Nice.
But the second story about that is my good friend Joe Miller. So we're figuring out how to make games work on all these different cable systems. You're probably not aware of this, but in those days, every cable box in each city was a little different from the cable box in the next city. And it was a real struggle to deal with this. So one day
Oh,
Joe
wow.
calls me up and he says, "You got to come down here and see what you're making me do." So I was on the like sixth floor, and the whole R&D floor was the whole third floor of the building we were in. I go down there, and there are probably 200 cable boxes set up
Jesus.
around the room. And he says, "Each one of these is different. And you're making me figure out how to make our games work on every one of them." And he did.
Well, and they all had to work through the same cartridge then. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
that was all the
Oh,
difficulty of it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh,
So it was it was really quite a task, but it worked. And people say, "Oh yeah, but it wasn't all that successful." Hey, there wasn't an internet back then, really,
yeah.
and we had 250,000 subscribers playing
Jesus.
games on our cable system at $15 a month, so it wasn't bad.
No, that's amazing actually. I mean, uh it's yeah, again a good reason to keep the Genesis alive. I mean, if you could keep
Absolutely,
software coming to it,
exactly, Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I
Now,
don't remember the
yeah,
deals, each deal with each third party company. So
no,
I
no.
probably, again, I can probably find it if I dig through my files. But and Shinobu Toyota would probably remember, and maybe even Al. Oh, no, Al wouldn't remember that. So anyway,
Hmm. Well, and so now this begs another question, and this is a speculation a fellow game historian of mine has, and it also kind of reflects a little bit of my short experience working at software, etc. Uh, there seems was was there a, or better said, it feels very much, especially through the sports connection, that the Genesis was a very popular system with slightly lower income households. Was that something that is true, or is that just a sort of a weird perception from nowadays?
I
Retrospective.
don't recall that at all. I mean,
Okay.
I think we were loved by. In fact, I would I would, maybe that's true because we were so friendly to things like Blockbuster rental of games, and the Sega Channel was lower cost than a $50 purchase of a single game. Maybe that's true because of those kinds of things. But in reality, I was just trying to expand the market. And then we also, I mean, we don't get a lot of credit for this, but we did a lot to try to get women into video game play. We had a lot of, of course, we had a lot of strong women on board in the company, whom I'm still in touch with all the time. And, you know, they wanted us to do games that were more appealing to women and also to market more to women. So we did a lot of that. And the fact that we sponsored rock concerts and things like that and had these displays in shopping malls, all of that, strangely enough, appealed more to women, I think, than to men. And we got a lot of credit for it, and a lot of people playing our games. I mean, I still get I get a lot of mail still, and a lot of it is
Hmm.
from females who say, "Hey, I started playing Genesis games when I was 14 years old, and I did it because I loved. I went to a rock concert, and then you guys were there and showed off your games versus Nintendo, and I thought that was so cool." Stuff like that. So, anyway,
I get it. Now the price war, and this is going back to the 16-bit. I know we touched on the Saturn a little bit. The price war with Nintendo,
hmm
where prices started dropping for the consoles, or the more complex pack-ins of games and so forth kept ramping up. Uh, how big, or how important were those decisions inside the company? And I guess how I'm trying to understand what was the process of making those decisions about when to drop price, when to change the bundles, and so forth. Uh,
yeah. Well, initially, of course, that was part of the my 5 point plan. When I went to the company, we had to reduce the price of the hardware. In my opinion, it was just too high, and I felt that we needed to take Altered Beast, just fine a game as it was, out because folks in Oklahoma and Kansas thought it was devil worship, and we had to put in the a game that we thought was going to be our best title, which was extremely controversial. Oh God, did they hate that idea in Japan? And that was going to become Sonic One, and they hated it for obvious reasons. You're taking away, first of all, you don't make much money or any money on hardware sales, and so you're putting a title in, and we're not going to make money on the bundle, and you're taking away the profit we would have made from a separate cartridge sale, which was highly profitable. So it seemed to them like a stupid financial decision. But to me, it was the way of getting more hardware in the hands of the consumer and thus ultimately winning the battle by that consumer is going to buy 3, 4, 5 games a year. So to me, it was a no-brainer, but it wasn't a no-brainer to the folks in Japan. They thought it was idiocy. Anyway, I forgot where I'm going on this, but um, it was initially it was an easy decision. Later on, it became a harder decision. Another interesting decision was selling a hardware without any game in it, which I had a hard time with, frankly, because I always believed on Christmas morning, consumers should be able to open up that package and have a playable product right then and there. And to have to go now buy Christmas Day a game didn't seem right to me. But, the price point was very low. And so it seemed to work out okay. But I still have a hard time understanding that one, frankly, as of my belief in products should be playable the minute you open that package. Anyway, um, and then I don't
Yeah.
know where to go.
And I understand it. And just in retrospect, I remember those bundles, and I was like, okay, if I start having to buy games and extra controllers and everything else right out of the gate, yeah, I can definitely see, especially the Christmas morning situation where an unknowing parent has bought this and didn't
Oh,
understand that they had to buy a game as well.
yeah.
Uh, Minor technicality.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
so you stay on at the company uh,
Yeah.
through to 96. You that last year at the company, knowing that you want to leave.
Oh
Uh,
God.
uh, are you active in the search for your replacement, or is it something where they're like, okay, he's already decided he's leaving, we're not letting him be involved with that?
Well, no, I tried to be, and I tried to recommend would be good replacements. Um, but I'm not sure how much influence I had over that decision. And of course, I was also aware of some of these other deals that were being contemplated by Sega of Japan. Now, I don't remember the names of the company, but turning over the distribution uh, of games to who was that? They did it to. It was like a jobber kind of wholesaler kind of guy. I didn't
Really?
think that was very smart. Anyway, I mean, so there were things they were doing they would ask me about, but they didn't really listen very well. Uh, and so I didn't have a huge influence over it. Um, Not sure it would have changed anything, but but who knows?
Okay. And one thing that we haven't talked about, and or only tangentially, was Sega Sega in Europe.
Yeah.
So the European operations, you talked about how they had approached you when you were at Matchbox for the Master System. That ends up going to Mastertronic. Virgin takes that over. And at some point, Virgin sells off that distribution operation. Uh, if I'm not mistaken, to Sega of America takes it over, or is at least involved with what becomes Sega Europe?
Well, we were very involved with that, yeah, and as I again, I'm terrible on these names, but I think Nick Alexander was running Sega Europe out of London. I believe Nick is either a relative or married to Richard Branson. I mean, he wasn't married, but I think his wife was a
Mm.
relative of Richard Branson, Virgin. So we had that relationship, and we did a lot of things together. He had a very aggressive. Uh, I thought I was aggressive in the United States, but he had a very aggressive advertising and marketing method. Pirate radio or whatever the hell it was off the coast of England. Uh, that seemed to work very, very well. And then, and I don't remember at what point in the chronology this occurred, but Virgin and ourselves invested in a number of games licenses with Disney. And so we did Aladdin together. And I remember when we introduced the Aladdin game, Richard came over, Branson came over, and of course, Jeffrey Katzenberg was at Disney at the time, and I was at Sega at the time. And boy, was that a corralling these cats at an E3 show and getting the game there in time, because everything gets done at the last minute. And the gal who was the product manager on the Aladdin game was ill, and she couldn't get up, or she was sick in the hotel. And we were supposed to have the game there, whatever morning that was, to show to Richard Branson and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and it wasn't there. And so I had to walk around the E3 show with these guys, Katzenberg and Branson, stalling. And I had an earpiece on so I could hear what was going on back at Sega of America's booth. And I'm taking them over to Konami, and I'm taking them over to Electronic Arts. And I'm saying, oh, look at this. Look what they're doing for Sega. And of course, Katzenberg has a very short fuse. I don't know if you've ever talked to him. He's a great guy.
No.
But anyway, he said, come on, Tom. What are you doing? You're stalling. Get us. And so we went back over, and by then I had heard in my earpiece that the Aladdin game, they had retrieved it. It was an EEPROM from this product manager's hotel room, and we had it up and showed it. And of course, it was all great, and became a very, very good game. But it was that kind of a relationship with. I mean, I think Nick liked to, I don't want to say copy, but he wanted to be as aggressive as I was in marketing in the U.S. and he was in England and Europe. So anyway.
Yeah. Now, and speaking of that, since you did have an advertising background, the final thing I do need to ask about the Sega period is the Sega screen. So, is that purely something that comes out of an ad agency that you guys have at the time? Was there a mandate from the C-level at Sega of America to do this? Where does that ad campaign come from?
Well, it came from Goodby Silverstein here, and we changed agencies and went, it was a prolonged process, and they were just wonderful. I mean, they were outstanding in their presentation, and as I recall, it came out of probably either Jeff Goodby or Phil Silverstein himself, uh, and of course it was the great sign off, and we used it for years. And I tell people I knew that we had a successful idea when I would go pick up my girls at an all girls school here in Palo Alto, and the girls would see me pull up and they'd yell Sega, and I knew, wow, we've communicated all the way through all the teen boys to the girls. And obviously that was true. And of course, we used it in all of our commercials. In sports, we had Joe Montana yell Sega. We had many different people yell Sega, and it worked very, very well for us.
Very cool. Okay, so is there anything about the Sega era that I should have asked that I didn't ask?
Oh gosh. Well, did we talk about Pico?
No, you're right. We haven't talked about Pico at all. Yeah.
Well,
The 6 platform.
yeah, there's another one. Although certainly not so much of a video game platform as an
No.
education platform. But I ended up loving Pico. They introduced it in Japan. It was modestly successful. We brought it over to the U.S. and we did, again, my friend Joe Miller, and we did our own titles. Remember, this was a book with a cartridge embedded in the book. It plugged into the Pico platform and showed a visual on the TV screen that was the same visual as was on the page, if there was a visual on the page of the Pico. And it basically was teaching kids reading skills. and having a lot of fun with them. You touch the picture on the book, and it would react on the television screen. So it was very interactive, back and forth, and and you could scroll your finger across a sentence, and it would read that sentence, or verbally read that sentence to you on the TV. And we sold about $100 million worth of Pico, and we positioned it as the child's first computer, and it was pretty successful, and people liked it for learning reading skills and other skills. I mean, we did some math games and what have you. But anyway, again, the board in Japan, even though it was a Japanese product and they invented it, said, "Why are you screwing around with this thing? Education is too hard. You're doing $100 million of sales on it, but you do 400 million if you did another Sonic title or another arcade title. So why are you messing around? It's too difficult." So they weren't in support of that either. And by the way, I liked the Pico so much it frankly inspired what became the Leapfrog Leap Pad. And I talk about toy companies knocking off any good idea. Well, in a sense, we knocked off the Pico.
I was about to say, I mean, so the Pico was was using essentially the Genesis tech, if memory
Yes,
serves me right.
yes,
Yeah,
it was the cartridge, right,
and
and
it,
the same chip.
yeah, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, the hardware was there. Now the application to the educational industry. Uh, How did you approach the marketing of the Pico? Were you trying to go to the same retailers as the Genesis, or were there other retailers where you thought that that product would be better received?
Well, both really. I mean, uh, I was at the time trying to convince retailers that they needed to have a separate education section in their stores. So the Pico wouldn't be next to the Genesis. It would be in a separate education section where they had other educational products, whether those were flashcards or math tools or whatever. But so anyway, I think I was a little bit successful on that with some retailers. Um, and people seem to like the Pico, but the buyers, but a lot of them didn't have good experience with educational products. So we did get into some other channels. Obviously, Lakeshore is one that I can think of. Uh, Gosh, some of the PC people were better at it. Best Buy was probably better at it. Uh, but it was difficult. It was obviously difficult. It was the start of a whole new era of educational products. We didn't sell to schools, which I later did when I went to Leapfrog. We sold to schools as well, which is another story. Oh my God. I used to get mad at retailers when it would take them a month to make a decision.
Oh,
School systems, it's like 3 years.
as someone who currently as or who has been teaching at a university for 7 years, I'm still waiting for some requests to go through. So yeah, I totally get it.
Oh gosh, that's a whole nother conversation. I mean, even at Leapfrog, we started a school division because we understood that a lot of the decision makers in schools, if you have a retail product, that means you can't be really educational. You've got to be pure education, right? And so we started a separate division. And we were somewhat successful getting Leap pads with different software designed for school systems, first grade, second grade, third grade primarily. And we'd be successful. We had quite a good business with LA Unified and Dallas and Miami and Chicago and the big school districts. But when I would travel after a deal was made and we'd ship boxes after boxes of this stuff to these schools, oftentimes I would go to a school where we were supposed to be. Couldn't find the product. Go to a storeroom, product had arrived like 18 months earlier. It's still in the storeroom. It hasn't been set up in the classroom yet. It was so frustrating, such a difficult. I mean, I love the school business, but boy, is it hard. And you have to have a huge amount of service people to make sure, and training people to teach people how to use whatever new curriculum you're dealing with. And I'm talking K-12. Actually, I'm probably talking K-4.
Oh, geez. So, okay, and that is a very good transition. Although one more question about Pico, and this will probably also apply to Leapfrog. Uh, Most of the Pico product was attached to some kind of pre-existing license.
Mhm.
So this obviously, I mean, Sega had experience with licenses like Joe Montana and Michael Jackson and so forth, but it wasn't the primary business in software creation. Did that change the equation since that was the primary source of software IP for Pico?
Good question, and I'm going to have a hard time remembering this. I don't recall when we started getting deals with prominent IP on Pico. I mean, I know we eventually ended up doing some Disney stuff, and I think Sesame Street and Garfield and what have you. So I think we figured that out with Pico. And by the time I got to Leapfrog, and by the way, another interesting person is Michael and Christine Risley, who managed licensing for us at Sega of America, and she also was very helpful when I was at Leapfrog and getting a lot of these deals done. And we did, God, we did licensing with everybody at Leapfrog on in terms of educational licensing. We did
Hmm.
big deals with Disney, with MGA, with uh, Sesame Street, with PBS, and a lot of different people. Um, but it
Yeah.
helped, it helped the communication because just doing oh, and of course we did use Sonic also, and at Leapfrog. God, I did Sonic at Leapfrog. I did Barbie at Leapfrog. I did Hot Wheels at Leapfrog. So known brands that I was familiar with also helped us get educational software done where there was a recognition by both the student and the teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it always gave you a huge boost to recognition. Uh, were those significant fees back in the day for licensing, or did they not have that big of an impact on the profit margin, if you will, of the product?
Oh no, they always did have an impact. I mean, we would. I think when you're in education, you tend to get a lower, more reasonable license fee than if you're just a video game. Uh, and so I think with Disney, we were paying probably 7% or something, whereas if you were a video game, you're probably paying in those days 12 or 14%. Today
Hmm.
it's God knows what. Uh,
Yeah,
so it did make it made a big difference.
gotcha. Yeah, I mean the stories I'm hearing nowadays about licensing fees are quite astronomical for
Yeah,
at
I don't
least toy
even know.
product.
I don't even know anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm so far out of it. Yeah.
Okay, so you leave Sega, and you're taking the idea of the Pico with you. And how does Leapfrog come about?
Well, these are long stories. So Leapfrog was founded by a guy named Mike Wood, who was an attorney, a very successful attorney. He had a son named Matty. Matty was having difficulty learning to read. So Mike went out to Lawrence Livermore Labs. He had some contacts out there, and he picked up some technology to put into a product called the Phonics Desk, which was the first product that he did. And the product initially had a chip. Uh, there was alphabet blocks, basically A, B, C, plastic blocks in the shape of the letter A, B, C, D, E, all the way, and each of them had a chip in them, and he put it on a platform, uh, and when it spelled out a word, it would say CAT, cat, uh, and that was kind of the invention. So anyway, longer story shorter, his brother-in-law and I were in YPO together. I was at Sega, obviously, and his brother-in-law was running a company for Enron. And he introduced me to his brother-in-law, Mike Wood. And the first thing I said to him was, well, number one, you got to have more than one product. You can't have just a phonics desk and try to break into American retail. You've got to have a series of products. Number two, you can't put a chip in each block. That's 24 chips. It's going to drive the cost through the roof. You got to put one chip into a base product and then somehow have each block be recognized by that chip in a place on the product and do it exactly what you're trying to do, but cut the cost dramatically. And so he did all those things, and he formed the company. And I'm still at, I think I was leaving Sega about that. And his company was Leapfrog. It was doing about 3 million in revenue, and very small, just through educational outlets. And so he needed financing. So back to Mike Milken. So I got financing well, actually, Milken actually hired me first. He hired me to run what became Knowledge Universe. Our second investment became Leapfrog. We invested, well, we bought 80% of the company, left 20% with Mike and his friends. And our philosophy was different than VCs today. We overfinanced companies. Why? Because we didn't want the CEO and the CFO running around trying to raise money. We wanted them running the company. And
Makes sense.
yeah, it worked. And so Mike was the second investment we did. Over the many years, with Mike and Larry Ellison, they each invested $250 million. So at one point, I was CEO of a company with 500 million in the bank and no business. So that was kind of different.
Wow.
But anyway, we over the years we invested in everything cradle to grave education using technology, and we had everything from PC training through teacher training to executive consulting, how to make them smarter presidents. That that was called Tech originally. It became known as Vistage later. In England, consulting, recruiting, and training on PC training. Obviously, Leapfrog. We started schools, preschools, under child discovery centers. We bought KinderCare, 2,000 preschools across. Anyway, a lot of stuff in education was what I was involved in. And I took my friend Joe Miller with me to Leapfrog and a number of other Sega executives, Paul Rio in finance and Diane Canassier for marketing, Madeline Canepa for product development, Michael and Christina Risley for licensing. And we ended up doing a lot of the same things we had done at Sega in Leapfrog. And we grew the company from 3 million to 18 million to 36 million to 150 million to 400 million to $650 million and took it public on the New York Exchange. Yeah.
Insane. I mean, and yeah, it's one of those products where if you don't have kids in that age bracket, you don't really notice that it even exists. And I'll be honest, as you were telling me this, I'm looking at the Leapfrog website and I'm just like, holy crap. This is an extremely wide palette of products that they're offering today.
Well, and by the way, I didn't mention, to Mike Wood's credit, he was both a Stanford graduate and a Berkeley law graduate. he connected with the Stanford School of Education, the dean there, Dr. Robert Calfee at the time, and he would say to Dr. Calfee, okay, for a first grader, what do they need to learn in how to read? What's first? What's second? What's third? What's fourth? And Calfee would tell him, and Mike would then, okay, we got to make this fun and interesting because it's not fun and interesting if it's just these words on a piece of paper. And so, to his credit, Stanford University basically crafted all of our curriculum that we put into toys that we made fun and interesting. And
Wow.
uh, and that was just brilliant. It was really brilliant. Make sure what you're doing is correct, then make it fun
Mm.
and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not getting to the goal of learning, then it can be fun and interesting, but it's not going to help you. Uh,
Right.
okay, so you're at Leapfrog until 2006, correct?
About
If
then, I
memory
think
serves
I
me.
stayed on the board even later than
Mm.
that, but that was when I was running it. Yeah.
And so do you just decide, okay, I'm done. I've had my career. I'm going to retire at this point, or were you pursuing something else when you decided to step down from the CEO position?
Well, I was doing other things, and of course, Milk and Bean, whom he is, had me doing lots of other things. And I ended up on the board of Blackboard Education, which is the largest learning management system in the world for universities. And that was taking a lot of time. And I ended up on the board of Cambium Learning Group, which is educational curriculum. And it started in reading, but it moved over into math and science and history and everything else. And so I was very much embedded in the education world by that point. Oh, and I went on the board of the NEA, which is not
And
popular
yeah.
today, the National Education Association, the largest teacher union in the world. Uh,
Mm,
so
wow.
I was I was busy in the education world. I was still tangentially involved in Leapfrog for quite a while. Um, and then I am, but I was still very much involved in education. And then later on, I formed global education learning with a partner of mine who was also a Stanford and Harvard graduate. And we were doing teaching English largely with Stanford curriculum in China,
Oh,
and
interesting.
doing other things there. Our main business was more than teaching. It was to be a resource to parents in China. And my partner spoke Mandarin, Cantonese,
Oh,
Shanghaiese.
wow.
And we teamed up with professors at various universities in China to help moms there any question they had about how to educate their kid. Whether that question is, where should I take my kid for piano or math learning or science learning? And I live in in Wuya in the middle of China, or I live in Canton or Guangzhou, or I live in Shanghai, or I live in Beijing. Didn't matter where they were. We would try to answer those questions and charge for it. So that ended up being quite successful. Um, Long story short, before the last election, uh, we had deals with educational companies in China, and we were impacting about 30 million families. But
Wow.
our concern was that if Trump won the election and relationships with the U.S. and China changed, which see, he wasn't a big China fan, we would potentially be in trouble. We might lose a lot of business. So we sold that company to a
Mm,
Chinese private equity firm, and it still exists today. It's called Yaolan today, which means cradle in Mandarin. Anyway, I, so
mm,
after I left Leapfrog, I was still very much involved in education in different aspects, whether not just so much the young kids aspect, but also the college aspect with Blackboard being the largest LMS and Cambium Learning being curriculum for kids of all ages. So I still was doing that for quite a while, and only recently stopped doing a lot of that. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
No,
but that's what
no,
I
no,
did
no.
after Leapfrog.
It's fascinating. I mean, uh, did you was the education thing or the bend to education a a question of passion or a question of expertise at that point for you?
Oh, certainly passion, because my expertise is pretty limited. But as I mentioned to you before, I mean, my dad was a professor, and so I had that in my blood. And I have 6 children. So my God, I served on the local school board here for God knows 13 years or something. So I've been involved in education both professionally and personally for quite a long time.
And I totally respect that. Uh, as an educator myself nowadays. So,
Yeah.
so I guess I need to. Well, I'm going to get into my final question, and I close out
Okay.
all my interviews with this two-part question, and that is: looking back at your career, what is one development in the video game industry that you thought was going to be huge, that was going to be a game changer that ended up going nowhere? And what is one change that you did not see coming that became huge?
Wow. That's a great question.
Thank you.
And yeah, it really is. Gosh, let me answer the second part first. Um, I was very much aware of, first of all, I tried to expand the market from kids to teens to college to adults to women. So I very much was in that ilk of belief, and I thought that esports was going to be a big deal way before esports was a big deal. And we were involved in it at Sega in a very early stage. So I think that worked out better than I'd ever expected, better than while I was there for sure. I mean, look at it today. Um, in terms of the first part of your question, I thought full motion video filming and the combining of full motion video filming and animation was going to be a really big deal. Turned out that the ability to do great animation was better than full motion video. So you didn't really need it, as it turned out. So I guess that's kind of the answer to that.
Oh, that is an excellent answer. I mean, and yeah, it was one of those things that at the time everybody was excited. I mean, oh my God, there's moving pictures on the screen. I was
Yeah.
taken in by it as well until, of course, I saw Aladdin, and then I was like, oh wait, all I need is really well animated sprites.
Yeah. Oh
Uh,
gosh.
Uh, Tom, I cannot thank you enough for giving me of your time. This has been really a fascinating look behind the scenes. Is there anything you'd like to say to any of the people who've used your product, the products that you were involved in over the years?
Well, the thing I always say to people, and I try to live my life that way too, is keep playing. You know, keep enjoying playing, and don't just be so serious about your life, but get some enjoyment out of playing in your life. Well, however you choose to do that. Uh, and by the way, I'm working on a book. Did I
Oh,
mention that to you?
sorry. No, you didn't. You didn't. Please,
Oh,
pray
yeah, I'm
tell.
working. Well, I got kind of talked into it. After Console Wars was published, which was just, my battle with Nintendo at Sega, a lot of cohorts from the past contacted me and said, well, yeah, it's a nice story, but you got to tell them the whole rest of your story. And I said, what do you mean? Well, your whole business career and the
Hmm.
lessons you've learned and the fun times you've had and the bad times you've had. So I am working on that. I have a literary agent. I never had one
Ooh.
before. and, and we're working on it now. I talk to him every week, and I share lots of stories with him, and he'll probably want to interview you at some point. So,
Yeah, I'd love. I mean, this this interview. I mean, come on. From Flintstone's vitamins all the way through uh, educational platforms in China. This this is an amazing story. This
oh, well, thank
needs to be
you.
seen in its entirety because there's no element of what you've done in your career that didn't influence the next step afterwards.
Well, thank you. And that's what people said to me that talked me into doing this damn thing. But by the way, nobody
Yeah.
told me how much work it was to write a book. And,
Oh,
well, I knew from Console Wars, but that was small compared to this. Anyway,
yeah.
uh,
Well, and this is why I really think that you have tremendous insight. Just alone what you've been able to share with me about the changing market and the potential you saw in products like the Pico, and how you took that, or the knowledge of how a computer platform works, and how you took that to a Leapfrog and so forth. These are important things because people try to take stories out of context, like Console
yeah,
Wars. It's a
yeah,
fascinating read, but there's a lot of context around it. I mean,
there is.
the crash of 83 is hugely influential on all the decisions that come after it. I mean, your
Yeah.
decisions at Sega, a person who did not have the experience of what happened at Mattel probably would not have acted the way that you did. I mean, let's face it, the people at Sega of Japan, had they been around and made had dealt with the crash of 83, probably wouldn't have made the announcement at E3 the way they did.
Well,
Okay,
it's been a
yeah.
pleasure.
Uh, thank you again for the time. This really has been a great conversation. Alone, the factoid that Mattel was not charging for the He-Man TV show. You have no idea how many years I've been trying to get an answer to that question. Uh, I literally have been hunting people down to try to figure out what the economics of that was. And I've talked to people who worked and produced Saturday morning shows for the networks, and they weren't able to give me that answer. And I was
I'm
like,
sure they weren't.
ah, so no, this is
Okay.
fascinating. Okay, Tom, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.